Hey everyone, this is an impromptu panel discussion on the current state of text editors for PHP. My name is Matthew Machuga. I'm a developer in PHP, Ruby, JavaScript, a few other things. Today with us we have Shawn McCool. Nathan, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I should have asked that ahead of time.
No, go for it. It will be entertaining.
Rijksen?
There you go. That's not too bad.
Nice. And Adam, I don't know how to pronounce yours either. Is it Wathan?
Oh, Wathan.
Oh God, I'm watching it on YouTube as I stream.
Great.
Nice. That's why I usually wear headphones with this stuff. Anyway, Adam, how do you pronounce your name?
Adam Wathan.
Wathan. Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
Excellent. So just to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves, let's run down the list and tell us what you do and which text editor is your primary one, since we're all using something different right now. Shawn, let's start with you.
Well, hi, I'm Shawn McCool. I make web apps for clients and just general problem solving and consulting. And I am using PHPStorm. I came from Sublime text background, and I have migrated about 8 months ago because I wanted to tell the JetBrains people why Sublime text was so much better than PHPStorm, and here I am using PHPStorm now. So that's my story.
All right, Nathan, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Nathan Rijksen. I'm a developer on Komodo IDE. So evidently, I use Komodo IDE, but I've gone pretty much through every single editor you can possibly imagine, from the well-known ones through the obscure ones. So yeah, I'll be here talking a little bit about Komodo IDE and hopefully finding out a thing or two about the other editors that I haven't tried in a while now.
All right, Adam.
Okay, I'm Adam. I work for a consultancy building web applications for clients, sort of the same thing that Shawn does, but so I write a lot of PHP, Ruby, and JavaScript, and I'm a Sublime Text user. I've been a Sublime Text user for about 3 years, and probably mostly just because I'm comfortable there, but yeah, we'll see how the discussion goes. So.
Nice, thanks. So Sublime's probably a good place for us to start, since I think everybody's had some sort of exposure to it. I've never been a full user, but I've dabbled with it a little bit, and I pair a lot with people who use Sublime. So, Shawn, since you made the migration, do you want to kind of give us an intro as to how you started using Sublime and what kind of led you to pull away?
Sure. So I started using Sublime because I was using the Zen IDE for a while. I don't even remember the name. What was it? Zen something?
Studio.
Yeah, Zen Studio. And before that, I was using NewSphere PHP Edit or PHP Ed, and I liked those fine. But eventually, I kind of got to the point where on the Sublime Text seemed so much more responsive, and it had this interesting fuzzy text search system and this single palette window where you could get to any feature of the tool immediately, basically. And so I was really kind of enraptured by that. Plus, it was just so easy to customize and make look nice. So I don't know, it really hit me at that time as this is what I want to do. And I really think Sublime Text is, to this day, probably my favorite text editor when it comes to graphic tools. I don't know, how much did you want me to get into? I really love the Sublime Text plugin functionality and how you can, kind of code your own functionality up in Python, which is really, really nice.
Sure, I mean, you can go as in-depth as you want. You can stop there and pass it off to someone else if you'd like. I mean, since you've moved towards PHPStorm, we know you do that for most of your PHP work, but you said you still use Sublime for note-taking. Is there any reason for that?
I use Sublime for basically everything that's just straight text. So I have like a little key on my keyboard that I hit, and Sublime pops up, and it's floating over everything. And I take notes in that, and I do everything in that because it keeps its state really nicely. And so I can just open up a tab, and I type into it. I don't have to hit save. I just pop it away, and it's just the state's going to be kept. And it's really nice that way. I think it really works well where something like PHPStorm, for example, does not work for note taking and stuff like that. It just doesn't even make sense anymore. It's for me. I use PHPStorm to make PHP apps. I use IntelliJ IDEA to make like Java or other types of apps, and I really kind of focus those development environments in a specific app building context, where Sublime Text seems to fit a lot of different contexts.
Nathan, how about you?
Well, for Sublime Text, I mean, I think dabbled in would be the correct term that Shawn used. I've tried it a little bit, but it's not an editor for me because I was really looking for IDE functionality. This was way back when I was even a Komodo user, or a Komodo developer, I should say. But yeah, so I tried Sublime, and it was great in those basic editing functionalities where like fuzzy matching and whatnot is very useful to go about your PHP code, considering PHP code can be hard to interpret by IDE sometimes. But I was really missing features such as debugging and unit testing and that sort of stuff that you wouldn't find in a basic editor. One thing I will say about Sublime, though, is that it has a very nice, huge community that would add features like that, because I'm very certain there's an Xdebug add-on that I tried way back when, which seemed to work quite nicely. The only big problem I had with it is that Sublime doesn't really allow you to extend its UI, so you'd be left adding shortcuts everywhere. And I think this is, I mean, for me, I like to use my editor without having to use a lot of shortcuts because I'm bad at memorizing that sort of stuff. I think from one programmer to another that will differ. Like obviously, people that use Emacs or Vim don't have much trouble remembering those kind of shortcuts. But for me, it's just a lot to add up, and I like to work just with what is intuitive. So yeah, I think for me the main reasons that I ended up switching back to Komodo at the time was just the lack of advanced functionality and the need to learn a lot of shortcuts.
Shawn or Adam, you might be able to attest to this a little bit, but did Sublime release more expansive UI modifications in version 3? I know it's still in beta, but is that what I saw?
You have to ask Adam. I really have no idea. I started with the Sublime 3 beta, but then I was gone basically.
I don't think there was like anything really crazy. I know they added the option to have like icons in the sidebar and stuff like that. I don't think you can do anything like adding toolbars or anything fancy like that. If you're looking for something that looks more like a Visual Studio or PHPStorm in its kind of default state, where you have a lot of stuff available to you on screen to reach for with the mouse. Yeah.
I think the reason Sublime does that most likely is just because they want to be very basic, or he, I guess I should say, because it's one developer, he wants it to be a very basic editor, where if he were to add this functionality where you could have your own custom toolbar, your own custom buttons, it would turn into kind of a large mess, or I mean, I'm guessing that's what his take on it is. You would just have a lot of clutter in there, and he wants it to stay simplistic, which I think is admirable. But I think it's also limiting because, for example, going back to the Xdebug example, you wouldn't even need a lot of UI. Basically, the one core functionality that was missing was to just be able to add a breakpoint, like to click on a line number and to have it add some visual indicator there, and have it add a breakpoint. So that wasn't even possible. I don't know if that's changed yet, but yeah, what I'm saying is I think I understand why it's that way, but I think also for some people that might be too limiting.
Does Sublime Text not have a git gutter or anything like that?
I'm not sure. I think you can have it display stuff just in the regular status bar. I don't think you can add like anything extra. I actually don't do any of my Git stuff.
I recall it had some sort of split view add-on where you could see Git information like in sort of a status bar, which is basically just another editor, which is, a lot of people seem to use in Sublime as a way to cheat UI in there.
Yeah, right. I haven't really played with it too much. I know, like, I pretty much live in the I always have the terminal open, right? I'm always jumping back and forth between the terminal and my editor, and it's just like one keystroke away. So most of the stuff that I do in the terminal, I haven't really felt the need to bring into my editor. The only thing would be like unit testing, which was pretty trivial to create shortcuts to just like spin up a terminal instance that runs the current test and stuff like that, which was really easy to do in Sublime. So.
Something I've observed, I know that like what Shawn was hinting towards with the git gutters, that Sublime does support git gutters. It'll appear right next to the number bar, so like you'll get a plus or a minus or just a change symbol. Emacs and Vim have a comparable plugin as well. It does just about the same thing. I can see Graphy commenting the same thing in IRC right now. But yeah, I know it allows certain UI modifications. I just don't know how far those things go. But somebody brought up a good point with the Sublime developer, and Nathan, I think it was you. What's his? I guess Adam, we'd have to ask this with you. How's the development speed been lately? I know that there was a lull, and he was getting some kind of some flack online in his forums and whatnot. Have you noticed any pickup recently, or?
There was a little bit of pickup for a little while, but it seems kind of slow again, and it definitely died off for several months there, enough to get people kind of worried that Sublime 3 was never going to come out, and it was all around the time where Atom came out, so people were speculating that GitHub had purchased Sublime Text and stuff like that. I know for me, the pace of development and the fact that it's just one guy working on it, and sometimes it seems like they're slow to respond to things, is kind of worrisome. But at the same time, the editor does pretty much everything that I need it to do, so I don't worry too much about it. But there has been times where I've wanted to make the effort to switch to Atom or something just because it's a lot more active, and I feel like if I had a suggestion for a feature or something, there would be a much higher chance of it actually being implemented. And it's also like totally open source, and seems a little easier to pull in your own functionality or write plugins. It's like very extensible. Like Sublime is very extensible too, but Atom seems to be even more so. So there's some appeal there. And I think a lot of people in the Sublime Text community were feeling the same way when that editor came out and everything was so quiet in the Sublime community for a couple months there.
I can definitely understand that. I used to be really big into TextMate when it was still in the 1 point whatever days, and there was a lot of issues where the developer kind of went silent for a number of years, and he would come back and like kind of show some really interesting tech articles on what he was working on. Like he'd have some new algorithm alignments or talk about making text different sizes in the text editor and finding ways to make that work. But ultimately, it kind of led to most of his audience kind of leaving, and Sublime was blowing up at that point. So with the strong similarities between Sublime and TextMate, everybody just migrated over there, and pretty much all the plugins still worked, so that was really great. For me at that point, it kind of felt like too much of a burn, so I started getting more heavily into Vim. I've been using Vim for probably 4 years now, and I've pretty much just stuck with open source editors since then, just out of the fear that the developer could go away at some point. Whether that's super realistic or not, I mean, it's happened before, so it could happen again, but it's just kind of the way I've taken a look at it. But at the moment, I'm kind of the minority here where your primary editors are proprietary, but in general, you do have a full company behind them, with the exception of Sublime. Shawn, how do you feel that JetBrains has made responses to suggestions from the PHP community as a whole? And do you think there's any improvements that could be made, or are they doing a pretty good job?
Well, anybody who listens to the Laravel podcast or listens to me talk and ramble in general knows that I have a really soft spot in my heart for JetBrains. Like I said, originally I started using PHPStorm to kind of itemize what I hated about it, so that I was hoping JetBrains, because somebody asked me that worked there, like the Harry Hottie guy, the guy who does a lot of public speaking, etc. about it. He's like, well, what don't you like about PHPStorm? So I'm like, let me get back to you in a couple months, and I'm going to switch to PHPStorm. I'm going to start itemizing everything. And what I did is I ended up coming up with a list of things I didn't like, and either they had already solved these problems and I just didn't understand, how to deal with it, or, I think that in general they've been very responsive to me. Actually, I started becoming very active on their ticketing system. So whenever I saw something that didn't work or was strange, I'd submit tickets, and they always were either following it up with it saying this is a duplicate of this issue, which I did a lot apparently, or this is a bug, or this is a new feature request. So I have a lot of like personal strong opinions on how things should run, and I don't expect everybody to agree with those, but I do know that, I don't know, maybe like 10 of my submissions and ticket systems were either fixed bugs or added features, and to actually feel like, okay, I submitted these things and then their team did something about it, that really makes me have some kind of like brand loyalty, because I think that, oh, I mean, maybe this tool is for people like me. It does have values that are in line. The company has values that are in line with my values, and I think that's a big deal. I think JetBrains, they do a lot of really good stuff. Their products are like free for students, so you just submit your student ID card and they give you their products. And I think their tools are extremely powerful. I really fell in love with ReSharper for Visual Studio when working with C#, and I bought and own copies of IDEA, PyCharm, PHPStorm. I use these for every single time I use a different language. If there's a JetBrains tool for it, then that's what I use, because I really feel like if I get in there and something's strange, either somebody will already know about it, it'll already be in the works, or it's just my own ignorance and somebody will let me know, and so that's great either way for me.
Make you feel like they're listening to you.
I mean, yeah, you can go into the tracking system and even search my name, and you'll be able to see like this page wall of me being unnecessarily involved, and how they respond to everything. It's really fantastic. You really feel like their team is processing through those tickets efficiently, and they're paying attention to what's happening. I think it's a really well-run company, honestly.
Great way to look at it, and that's awesome that they're that involved with their community. Nathan, since you represent Komodo to some extent here,
Yeah.
I've seen you guys respond pretty well, and I see Rob Clancy and IRC making comments all the time, and it seems like you listen to that pretty well. And you've openly asked me multiple times, if you see anything wrong with Vim modes, like just tell me, and we'll get that looked at.
Yeah. I think over the last year we've really been trying to encourage our community more and more to contribute. And by contribute, I don't necessarily mean just like writing add-ons or documentation or anything like that, but just contributing can just be reporting bugs. And yeah, you have no idea how big of a help that can be, because I sometimes get the opportunity to walk someone through the IDE or to get feedback from them directly, and you'll hear all sorts of things like, oh, I run into this bug and that bug, and then ask them, why don't you report it? And they're like, yeah, well, it's so much hassle to just go over there. And Rob Clancy included, like he's complaining to me yesterday about some bug that he ran into, and I'm like, okay, well, please report it, and then we can look into it. And he's like, yeah, but I don't like your bug tracker, which, I mean, that's a valid concern, but at the same time, if you're not going to report it, we're not going to be able to fix it. And I told him, like, yeah, I'm sorry, but you don't get to complain to me if you're not going to be reporting those bugs, because I'm not a human bug tracker, even though he likes to think I am. But I think Shawn touched on an interesting subject there in saying that getting this response makes you appreciate the product that you're using and the company behind it. And given that we were talking about Sublime and its developer not really responding to its community, I can say for myself, working on Komodo, there are times that you are just completely spread all over doing so many things at once, I cannot imagine for one single guy to be doing all of that, like sales. Well, I guess marketing he's not really doing because the community does it for him. But sales, development, bugs, and then talking with his community. That might not seem like a lot of work if you're not used to doing any of those things or doing a combination of those things. But I can definitely assure you, being someone that that works with a lot of those areas because I like to, not because I necessarily need to, but I like to be involved with all those areas. Doing all of that work can be just a lot to take care of. So, not to say that I think it's right that he's not answering his community or something. I don't know what the whole scenario is around that, but this definitely does give you some perspective that Shawn just gave me when he was talking about that, as to why he might not be as responsive with his community.
For someone who's created their own UI framework that works on Windows, Linux, and Mac, he deserves a lot of credit for that alone, and coding in C++ all day, so a lot of props to him. Didn't want it to seem like we're coming down on him for just being, a little laggy with some of his updates, because I'm sure he's getting burnt out a little bit. So,
his UI is written in C++?
That's what I read online. He has somebody watching his forums, and I don't know if the person works for him or not, but he or she likes to kind of give an update if a lot of people are complaining on something. And last I saw, somebody commented on a Stack Overflow where they said the framework is written in C++ because there were a lot of people wondering why it's cross-platform and how the scripting languages work.
Interesting.
I think that we all have some experience working in either small teams or just alone, and it's hard to really. I think that if I was working on a tool like this alone, I would be very hesitant to bring other people in if I didn't feel it was necessary, because there's so many values to being the sole decision maker, and the domain like nobody else ever will, since it's your baby. So bringing in other people can kind of be tough. Maybe he doesn't want to do that. I think that if that kind of responsiveness is really important to you, then it makes sense for you to go with something that has a bigger company behind it, because obviously that makes a lot of difference. But if it's not that important to you, and you're looking for those unique aesthetics or unique something from your tool, then I don't think it matters so much.
Yeah, and he definitely seems to be going for that, because as I was alluding to, there's certain functionality missing for me and probably also for others, which alienates some programmers, but he seems to be very set in his ways about this is what my editor should be, which is admirable.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of benefits to kind of each way somebody manages the editors. Let's take Vim or Emacs, for example. Bram is mostly the core developer for Vim. I don't know how many other people contribute patches to core Vim, but he tries to get in what he can for every minor release, and sometimes things can't make it. Like Python has been requested as first-class support for a long time, like core support, not just here docstring being imported in and then passed along to a parser. So that was something he hasn't been able to fully implement. But now there's NeoVim, which is the port off of Vim, where it's a full team of people with one person at the helm who says, like, here, if you guys can handle these things, I can tackle these components, and then we can try to get some work done. So that's been working good. He ultimately has the final say, but he does try to keep it as a full, I don't want to say panel, but a full discussion board. So I think what we should try to move towards now is exploring our different workflows a little bit, kind of show how we work with PHP projects. Adam, since you may have to jump off a little bit early, did you want to start off, or do you want Shawn to start, or?
Yeah, I don't mind starting. Let's get the screen share going here, I guess.
And I have nothing specific to point out, just anything that you find interesting in the Sublime workflow. We'd love to see that.
Sure. So can you guys see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so I guess kind of the most important things to me in my editor are just being able to do stuff fast, right? Something that was always a pain point for me was just navigating around, especially when I was first learning to code and just using things like Notepad++ or whatever, and didn't know anything about any keyboard shortcuts. It pains me to see people pressing the same key twice in a row, right? If I have to go over and edit something, it's brutal. So just being able to quickly move by words or by camel case words using different keyboard shortcuts, or I have keyboard shortcuts just to arbitrarily move up and down by 3 lines at a time instead of 1 line at a time, just to move around a little bit faster. or being able to like jump to different files really quickly, or being able to like jump to methods in those files. Um, that's the stuff that really like makes me uh, happy to be using Sublime. And these aren't things that other editors can't do either, which is like, I don't know if Sublime really has a lot of features that you can't do in other editors anymore. Like I know like the fuzzy search was kind of like a new thing at the time, but you can do that with a lot of things now, like
Sublime
PHPStorm
still
does it.
has the best fuzzy search, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I haven't experimented with much others, but I mean, it always works really reliably for me. Like I can just type the first two characters of a couple things. I don't even look at the drop down that's like showing up, right? I just like start typing something and just hit enter and just assume that I'm landing in the right file all the time. And it's pretty much always right because it seems to kind of learn which files you're using the most and or which ones you've opened most recently, or prioritizes tabs that are already open and stuff like that. Being able to some of the other things that I think obviously like for anyone who's used Sublime, they know about like the multiple cursors, right? Which I thought was so cool when I first started using Sublime. So if I needed to like rename this variable in a couple different places, right, I could just do it quickly like that. Or it's really handy if you have like a list of strings that are just like comma separated, right? Like, and you just need to like convert those into like all separate lines. You can just really easily just like do that. Um, Other stuff like just being able to like delete whole lines at a time. I see so many people will like select a whole line and then delete back to the end and then delete again. Like there's keyboard shortcuts for just quickly deleting the current line that you're on, or like adding a line underneath the line that you're on, or above the line that you're on, or moving this line around between other lines. Like that's some of the stuff that I find makes my workflow more efficient in Sublime. Like it's not really stuff specific to PHP. It's just about like manipulating text as quickly as possible, and there always being a way to, in as few steps as possible, go from where I am to where I want to be. Like if I want to move this line, I don't want to have to think about selecting the line, cutting it, moving somewhere else, inserting a new line, and pasting it. I just want to move the line, and there always seems to be a way to do stuff like that in Sublime, which is why I've never really had to think about switching to other editors too much. There's a lot of other features and stuff like PHPStorm where you can do cool refactoring stuff or automatically importing use statements and stuff like that. And I wish I had that a lot of time, and I try and write stupid plugins and macros that simplify some of that stuff, but it's never going to be as good as something that like is actually understands PHP. But because I have to write stuff in so many languages, and because I'm always writing blog posts in Markdown in this thing, like Shawn, I take all my notes in Sublime. I use it for everything. The trade-off of just being able to just use one tool all the time and not have some of those extra features, for the most part, hasn't really bothered me too much. So that's probably like some of the stuff that I use the most. I mean, being able to like jump to symbols in any file is cool, which I mean you can do that with C tags and Vim or most other editors too. But I guess a lot of these are just features that maybe someone who isn't really super proficient with their editor should figure out how to do in their own editor, because it's just stuff that can improve your workflow a lot in general. That's pretty much, I mean, I don't know, I don't really have a lot of other specific stuff to show unless you guys have stuff that you'd like to see me demonstrate, or questions you have, or maybe other questions other people might have that you think I should go over.
Adam, so when you're like making new files and you're doing code, like are you using templating, snippets, generating code? Like what does your tool do for you? Are you mostly just saying this is the thing that I want to type characters into and have just work and do coloring, searching mechanism? I mean, really kind of what's flow benefit from it?
There, I don't know if that was just me or if that was other people too.
Yeah, could you just repeat that, the last chunk of that block?
Oh, sorry.
Came through.
Yeah, I was just asking how your workflow actually benefits from using that tool. Are you using it just on like a byte by byte character level, or is there more to it? Or is there snippets? What's going on there?
I do have snippets for certain things that I do a lot, like a test snippet, right? That'll just like throw in like a block to write a test, or I have like something to automatically import like a namespace. So, I mean, if I was to create a new file in this like exceptions folder, right, like blah exception, just hit like one command that'll like import or figure out what namespace that file is supposed to be and add the PHP stuff at the beginning. I'm a fairly fast typer, so I don't have snippets for tons and tons of stuff. I mean, I'll generate function definitions pretty fast and stuff like that, but for the most part, I haven't found that to be like a real block for my workflow. I'm finding that I can usually think about the problem I'm solving while I'm, typing out a class definition. I'm not just thinking about typing the class definition. I'm thinking about other stuff at the same time, or trying to talk on a Google Hangouts video while I'm trying to type and think about other stuff and whatever, right? So that's probably a part of my workflow that I could improve, I would say.
How fast do you type, and how do you think that affects the tools you use? And
so on the typing test website that I practice on quite often, it's 10fastfingers.com. My best is 148 words a minute on just a QWERTY keyboard. And I don't know how that affects my choice of tools, I guess. Sometimes it's kind of hypocritical to what I just said before, but to me, typing is almost like a waste of time. So if I already know the solution to something, I want it to be on the screen as fast as possible. Any time that I spend typing, a lot of the time is just an obstacle between where I am and where I want to be. So being able to do things as quickly as possible is good, which is why I should probably look into more snippet and templating stuff. But I think typing is a fundamental skill that everyone should have. I mean, I was surprised that it seems like typing over 100 words a minute is a lot less common than I thought. And I kind of don't think of that really as even fast. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that people use tools that either they are familiar with, and that's the primary motivator, or that cover up some shortcoming that they may have identified in themselves or just automatically connected something with. So it's hard for me to know. To me, typing isn't really that important. If you can't do it quickly, it's okay, because so much of what we're doing is not typing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that about all you wanted to show for Sublime?
I mean, I think so, unless anyone else has specific questions that would require a screen share or anything. I think that kind of covers mostly what I'm doing in the editor for the most part, is just kind of jumping around and just chopping up text. So.
Adam, how much time do you spend learning to use that tool, and are you comfortable with that amount? Do you wish you put more time into it, or do you feel like you're in a sweet spot?
I think, I don't know if I spend dedicated time to learning things. I think I just have kind of a workflow and mentality towards my tools that helps me learn them constantly. So I've worked with people in the past that if they don't know the keyboard shortcut for something, they'll find it in the menu and they'll press the menu item and not think twice about it. For me, if I have to do something that I think has a keyboard shortcut that I don't know has a keyboard shortcut, I will go to the menu, find out what the keyboard shortcut is, close the menu, and do that action with the keyboard shortcut, and just always force myself to do that until it becomes second nature. So I think it's just a matter of not necessarily, it's not so much about finding out what your editor can do as much as it is about finding inefficiencies in your workflow and finding ways to make the editor solve that problem for you, and recognizing that something's an inefficiency, and making sure that there's a way to speed that up, and then putting that into practice because it bothers you that it's slow, not because you're trying to learn the editor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that covers how did I phrase it? Just the learning curve for the application. And I appreciate the way you look at the menu item and you try to learn the keystroke, because I think that's really helpful in 99% of cases. And I wish I could do it as well as you're doing it, because right now I get to the point where I just get angry typing the long way, and then I figure it out, and at the point I'm ready to throw the computer, then I learn the shortcut, and then things work better. So hopefully I can adopt your workflow a little bit better. All right, so it looks like Nathan's ready to go. He has the other computer up right now, so yeah, you can just share one screen, whatever works for you.
I'm gonna, I don't actually have an option to share just one screen, I think.
Okay, and while you load that, What?
Maybe Shawn just take this one so I can figure out the screen sharing because I cannot share just the editor as it will not show context menus and such.
Okay.
Right.
I might just have to disconnect my other monitor just so I can share one screen.
Wait,
Yeah.
Shawn, could I just ask a quick question here, just to kind of give some context? Are we all using some sort of Unix-based environment right now? Adam, you're on a Mac, and then
Yeah.
Nathan, you have both, right? You have a Mac and a Linux machine there?
Yeah, I'm talking on Mac and I work on Linux.
Okay. Then Shawn, I think you kind of go across Windows and Linux based on which development you're doing at the time, right?
Yeah, I'm basically like a full-on Linux person all the time, but for gaming, of course, Windows. And then if I have to do like Unity 3D, then I favor Windows over OS X because I don't have a lot of OS X hardware. I have like a Mac Mini; it's kind of slow.
Okay. I just wanted to check on that because of kind of the way the different tools operate in different environments, and I have almost no experience on how any of my editors work in Windows land, so just wanted the question out there. But yeah, let's see your workflow because we know you spend a lot of time on it. And you actually have a package out for your Sublime config, or I'm sorry, your PHPStorm config to look like Sublime, right?
Yeah. So I got really used to the way the Sublime text looked really nice, and I was frustrated that PHPStorm did not look nice. Basically at all, especially on Linux, because you know how Linux has some font rendering insufficiencies, and that's just the way it goes. So I decided that I was going to learn PHPStorm by making it conform to my expectations. So I went in and I took the color scheming that it was made by two separate people, Dale Reese and someone else, and one was a theme for the editor, one was a theme for the syntax coloring, and I just built it into a package called Space Peacock because it was made from Space Gray and Peacocks in Space or something. I don't remember what it was called, but they went really well together, and so I can show you here what I have. And let's see, let me full screen this here. I assume you can see my screen now, and this is just a file that just like a random controller type file that I have here. And let's see here. Did you have any other questions about the Sublime integration? Because for me, it was important to feel really comfortable in PHPStorm, and it was kind of a beast to learn. A lot of what happens when I see people go in PHPStorm is they see this really just terribly ugly situation, and they're like, what's going on here? There's background colors on my text, and there's all these things that they're trying to communicate. So I said, okay, I'm just going to remove all of those features, all those visual indicators, and start bringing them in one by one as I learn them and focus on that. So I ended up with this, which I think is a pretty decent looking way of doing, way of making PHPStorm look. So this is, to me, is my, my best effort so far. And I also noticed that the PHPStorm, they seem to have this weird keyboard shortcut thing where maybe some of the keyboard shortcuts they had in earliest versions of the IDE that PHPStorm is derivative of, maybe those are the ones that get the best locations on the keyboard. Because I'm doing stuff, I'm like all these Control-Alt-Shift-F12, it's like I have no intention of ever pressing that combination in my life. So I remapped to what I felt made sense, starting with things like, do you see this pop-up here? Is Google Hangouts capturing this pop-up?
I don't see a pop-up.
So it's not going to record pop-ups, and that's okay because it's not important. It has like a fuzzy search that's like Sublime Text. It's not as good, but in some ways it's very comparable. So, Sublime Text is just faster and nicer, and that's okay with me. But
on the topic of aesthetics, real quick, does the Java UI rendering bother you at all? Or I know Java's not too bad at being rendered on Linux these days, but some environments can get a little wonky still.
It's a lot better in Java 8 with Java 8, for example, and I don't really have a problem with it. It's to the point where it's not such a big slap in the face to me that I can ignore it. I wouldn't call it ideal. I still think Sublime Text on OS X is just the best looking possible scenario. That's my. But I can't just give up what I have. It's not possible for me at this point. So PHPStorm had really bad keyboard shortcuts, and I remapped them to Sublime text shortcuts, and then I went through the stuff that's the most important. For example, let's just say I don't even have this constructor, and I want to inject a command bus. So I do something like this, and let's imagine I don't even have this field. So I want to do something like this. I hit Alt-Enter, and I tell it to initialize my fields, and I tell it which field will bus, okay? So you can see here it created this up here, and I just tell it command bus. Usually it figures that stuff out. And it assigns it with the dependency injection, and I can do that again with the illuminate request if I need to. I can just hit Alt-Enter, initialize fields, I want to initialize requests, and boom. And stuff like that really makes me happy. I can generate a doc block, and it'll put all that stuff together. This is really important to me. If I want to make a new controller, I have a couple options. I could either just go to one of the controllers I have and tell it to refactor and copy. I'll call it Bob controller because I don't care about anything. And then, of course, I have to rename this, which I actually requested that they change that, but that's beside the point. And then I can just work in it like that. Or if I don't usually use my mouse too much, I can go over to my sidebar, pop open new PHP class, and tell it whatever. So I get this stuff. And so that's all really nice and dandy to be able to fill these things in. But also I end up changing my code style a lot. And a lot of people don't like this about me, and I'm okay with that. But let's say I have my code like this. It's a lot like I think this is PSR2 compliant now. But if I hit my format button, then I get my code style. So this is the code style I prefer. You don't have to agree with me, but you can customize this to a very serious extent. You can say where you want your braces, new lines, spaces, and I actually had a problem with the way that JetBrains kind of made conditionals. So normally you say if true something, right? But if I want to invert that, I want a space here. I want spaces on each side. Now, not everybody is into that, but that's what I'm into. So if I walk into code like that and I hit reformat, then it's there. The reason it can do that instead of just this is because I submitted a ticket and they're like, okay, we're going to do this. And a lot of other people want it too. It's not like I was like the only person who did this, but the fact that I really want that space there so that I can see that there's a unary not, then that's a big deal to me. So the fact that now I can support my actual code style that's based on my views is kind of fantastic. Then you have a lot of cool stuff like this. A lot of people might not like this. Maybe it's a long line or something. Let's just imagine it's a long line. I can highlight the code in here and tell it I want to extract a variable. So I'll just use my keyboard to choose this instead of the number so that you can kind of see what I'm doing. Do you see this refactoring pop up, by the way?
No, I don't think we can see any of the additional pop-ups.
Okay, well, just trust me, there's a pop-up and it says extract, and I'm going to click variable. I'm going to tell it I want the variable request in here. Now we have this pulled out into request. This is exceptionally useful if, for example, you're going to use request again later. So, if I decide that, okay, I have refactored this method and this class down. I no longer need to have this assigned to a variable. I'll just hit a couple buttons and tell it to inline, and then it'll inline it right there. Now, the thing that really strikes me as important for me these days is the fact that I don't want to be working and operating on code at a character-by-character level. I don't want to open up Notepad and type out things and then have Notepad give me syntax highlighting, and that's not going to work for me. I want to operate on individual structures, and for that I need my tools to understand the language I'm working in. So I can pop these methods around, I can do all kinds of things like that. Refactorings are what's the most important to me. If I have a method that, let's say, is called cat, and it takes a Bob and a dog, and I have a bunch of code in here, and then a lot of other places in my code I'm referencing this method. And if I need to refactor it so that the arguments are swapped, well, what does that really mean? If I'm using a text editor or something like Sublime Text, for me it means that I have to do a search and replace and hope that it caught everything and hope that it didn't catch anything that was wrong, and run tests and hope the tests cover everything that I possibly could have changed. really to be responsible, I'm going to need to do a search and replace and go through and visually verify every single instance. But now I can just do a refactor or change signature. I can tell it that I want to swap the arguments, and you probably can't see my pop-up, which is unfortunate, but it goes through and refactors it, and now I have every single file that's in my project that reference that method now has those arguments swapped again. So I can undo that even. So if I hit Control-Z to undo, then it goes through all of those individual classes that it just changed and undoes them. So, you know, if you choose reasonable defaults when you're doing refactorings, they're safe. If you choose to refactor inside strings, for example, then that's not going to work out so well for you a lot of times, because who knows what's inside strings. So you'll notice here I'm using this PHP 5.5 class constant. And I do that because when I'm doing a refactoring, if I change the name of the inbox controller, I can do it right here even. I'm going to rename inbox to controller to some other controller. And look for usages. And so what it's going to do is that gives me refactorability at every position that a class expresses. Because a lot of times in PHP, I end up with classes in strings, and I'm not really huge on that, into the whole string thing that PHP is so awesome on. So here you can see this other controller here has been renamed, and I can rename it back by hitting Control-Z, but of course it doesn't like that I'm actually in that file. And then I have my inbox controller, and I can click through that. And it's cool, and I can do a lot of interesting things, like I can move this method up into base controller, so it's now in the superclass, or I could go into my code generation thing tool and say, okay, what let's see, like override methods. Let's see here, what does base controller have? Well, it has a setup layout method. So here, I just told it that I want to override the base controller setup layout method, and so here I have. Exactly that, and it automatically says run the parents version, so I could put anything in there, and that's really nice. And honestly, you're going to have to tell me what you want from me, because I could go on for about an hour and a half on this stuff.
Well, yeah, it's kind of the interesting thing is, like, a lot of this stuff is super interesting, and the different features and ways of looking at the code is kind of what I'm there to look at. And I appreciate that you really made that point kind of hit home. Because like PHP, oh, and especially what you said about the string, because PHP uses a lot of strings for everything, and doesn't really have the kind of constantation that like Java and other languages would have. So I feel like a lot of the static analysis tools and a lot of the refactoring tools will never quite be up to par. But I think that JetBrains here has made some good effort in that direction, and plugins for Vim or Emacs and Komodo and all the other ones that handle this as well. I like the editors thinking at that level, so I don't have to. I think that's a really neat thing, and I would like to see more editors go that direction. Were there any other features inside of that you can think of offhand that you want to show, or should we pass it off to Nathan to show us what Komodo does?
I can run my tests in the IDE. I can add composer dependencies in the IDE. I don't have to open the composer file. You can write your own plugins, and it's Java. So if you want to change the way the user interface works, you have to just code some swing stuff, and then you're good to go. So it's very customizable, like truly into the app. You can customize it. Mm-hmm. And the plugins are incredible. And again, if my pop-ups worked with the way that Google's recording my app, then I could show you. You can browse through all the plugins within the IDE. So the IDE is it's like this. It's not just a tool that you use for coding. It's a tool that you use to manage the tool, and it has all these really nice things. So you can browse and say, okay, I want Gherkin support. I want Behat support in there. I want an annotations plugin so that I can work really well with annotations. And the Symfony plugin is really fantastic if you use Symfony, and it does so much for you. The ecosystem is very, very strong and vibrant, and the fact that plugins from one IDEA technology are often cross-compatible with other IDEA editors really, I think, makes adds a lot of benefit. But I think that you're not going to get the use out of something like PHPStorm if you are not really studying and focused on investing yourself into it. And so if you think, yeah, I'm not going to invest myself. I'm not going to study just to be able to type code into a window, then I don't think these tools are for you.
So related to your plugins, because I kind of want to get a feel for each plugin environment, does JetBrains give you access to higher level constructs, kind of like the ones you were demonstrating, where you can say, like, let's take the argument flipping, for instance, or I want to generate a class based on this information. Do they give you higher level constructs, or do you have to do a lot of string manipulation?
Well, I'm going to say I don't think string manipulation is really even going to be an option for the most part. I don't think that that's how the tool thinks of a lot of this stuff frequently. I think you can pull in those buffers, but I don't see the reason for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually get plugins that people make that add new intentions. So for example, when I did the type hinting in the constructor, you could see that I could hit Alt-Enter, and then it helped to initialize those fields for me. I never type this Bob equals Bob, like, ever. That's just like repulsive to me at this point. But people actually release plugins that add a bunch of new intentions. And if you go to the JetBrains docs on their website, they actually show you how to code that stuff. Here's how you code your own new intentions. So, you can release language support for PHPStorm that all you have to do is code it up. But the fact that it is Java does increase the barrier to entry as well. Mm-hmm. So with Sublime Text, it's Python. So Python is a lot easier to use. It's a lot faster. You don't have to set up as much stuff. You don't even really have to have Python. You just go and create the plugin, and Sublime Text handles that for you, and that's fine. But that's not going to be the case with one of these Java tools.
Right. Yeah. It's fun to see tools that give you the higher level constructs and the higher level data structures so that you don't have to manipulate everything. Like for Vim plugins, we have to do a whole lot of string stuff. We can grab entire buffers, we can spawn off windows and things, but there's not a whole lot of syntactical information or semantic information available to us. There's like certain things that you can do, and Emacs has a better language parser internally, and it has better ways of representing syntax. So that one has a bit more available to it, but it's still, it's low-level stuff because it supports so many different editors. Yeah. And I like the idea that an IDE can provide better tools for the developer to kind of build a next-level tool easier, rather than trying to implement a PHP parser.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Nathan, do you got your environment set up?
Yep.
Awesome.
I'll just prefix this by saying I am expecting a delivery any minute, and I have 2 dogs here that will freak out when the doorbell goes. So if you hear dogs freaking out and I'm all of a sudden gone, Matt, you'll take over for me. Let's see. So I had to put this into broadcast mode somehow, Shawn?
Yeah, if you share your screen, you can say present to everyone, and then you'll see it for everyone. And so right now, I think that, we might see it.
I think I have an option for that. Your screen sharing is all it says. Matt, are you able to ensure that my screen is shared, or?
I can see your screen right now, and I have it set up to be what's on display, so it should be working.
All right.
Right now I can see your terminal window and the Hangout window.
All right, perfect. So there is a ton of stuff that I would like to talk about for Komodo. Like Shawn, I can just get started and I'll keep going on forever. But I'll try to limit it to a couple things. Since you were talking about workflow, I'll talk about some of the features that I added recently or over the time that I've been working for Komodo to help me with my workflow. And I also wanted to touch on what Adam spoke about, like he was talking a lot about shortcuts and whatnot, and how they allowed him to do stuff. And in turn, Shawn was talking about code that didn't exactly autocomplete or format itself in the way that he wanted, and he had to open a bug report for that. I wanted to talk about that because Komodo already has a lot of that functionality built in that Adam was talking about with Sublime. I think pretty much everything I saw there you can do in Komodo. And B, if you run into an issue where Komodo doesn't do something exactly the way you want it, you can easily add that functionality yourself. Of course, you're free to report it, and we can see if it's a good feature that we want to add to the IDE as well. but the point is that you wouldn't be blocked by us filling that feature. You'd be able to do that yourself. I mean, you might very well be able to do that in PHPStorm as well. I'm just saying. All right. So the first one I wanted to show you. You can see my editor right now, right? So you can transpose lines up and down in Komodo 9, but prior to that, you would have to do it through a macro, because we quite simply haven't gotten around to implementing it yet, even though it's a very simple thing. So this is Komodo 9 I'm using right now. It's a developer version. You might see me run into some bugs because it is a developer version. Matt, I think you already experienced that a bit because I believe you also tried the preview earlier this week. So just a heads up on that. So one big feature that I really love about Komodo is that you can easily record macros, and I'm going to record a macro now to basically show you how you can easily re-implement transposing lines. Again, you can already do it, but it's just an easy demo to show you. So you can do this just shortcuts. You can do this just through menu. I'm right now going to do it through the toolbar since it's a nice visual representation. So I'm going to click Record Macro. I'm going to select the entire line, cut it. I'm going to go to the line above. I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to stop recording, and then I can basically repeat that. All right. Made an error there, but you get the gist of it. Of course, you have to ensure that you put the right keystrokes and whatnot, but you get the basic idea of it. And what you can do then, when you've created your perfect macro, you can actually save that to your toolbox. So I can say transpose line up, and it will be saved in my toolbox, which I can access right here. And if you edit that, you can actually see that it's basically just some JavaScript that repeats the keystrokes that you just filled out. So you could even customize it further if you want. You can then even set a key binding on it. If it's relevant, you could trigger it on certain events. The point is that you can very easily just record some keystrokes and turn it into a macro that you can access at any time. Now, something Adam, I believe, touched on was wanting to remember every keystroke for himself. And as I said, I'm not very good at that. Or maybe a better way of saying is I'm not invested in that. I don't want to do that. I want stuff to just be intuitive. So the important stuff, of course, I've memorized. Like I use delete line, I use transpose a lot. That stuff I've memorized. But there's often snippets, like I just created this macro that I might want to use on occasion. So I don't want to set a shortcut for that every time, or I don't want to use a shortcut for that because I use it very rarely, and it would just, I don't want to try and bring up the mental power to remember that because I have more important stuff to concern myself with. So for that, you could, in Komodo, just use the tool which is kind of like the HUD tool, I believe, in Ubuntu, where you can access menu entries. It's sort of like that, but this is for menu entries as well as snippets, as well as anything that you saw in my toolbox right there. So what did I call it? I called it transpose macro. I could then just call that here. I think that's the one I just created, and just invoke it right there. So that's something that Komodo already supported, and I re-implemented recently for 9.0 to basically help you access those shortcuts that you don't want to memorize.
Not to interrupt, can you show that menu one more time?
Yeah.
On the side, was it showing the key command for that or no?
Oh, so this is the Commando add-on, which is a new feature in Komodo 9. The UI is still being polished. I do want to show the shortcut there. It's currently not showing that. Currently trying to figure out how to get this to render properly so that I can show you all the information without it overflowing. But
Right.
yes, you will be able to see that.
So that's like one of the things that I really enjoy about Emacs and Lighttable is both of those editors will actually give you the way to look up any key bindings. And if you execute something the long way, in the mini bar, it'll say, next time you want to run this, if you want to use Control-C, Control-X, or whatever, you can do that. And I like those little reminders.
Yeah, IDE has a plugin for that too. It'll basically slap your hand every time you use the mouse for something.
Nice.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'll consider that because we're also working on a new notification system in Komodo, so that would fit in perfectly. So Thank you for that.
Yeah, the nice thing is you can actually go and look at statistics page and see how many times you use keyboard combinations and which versus the when you're using their mouse, because there is an idea of a developer a metric about how the developer handles their tool and how much more efficient they could be. So the idea is if you want to analyze that and measure it and make progress towards whatever goal, then you have the tools to do so.
Yeah, yeah, that's a bit more advanced than something I will be wanting to implement in Komodo, because kind of the I'm not sure what the right word is, but what we try to do with Komodo is we implement the stuff that you would really need and want from your IDE, and then we provide the tools so that you can have the more specific stuff implemented easily through a macro or something like that. So I like the idea. I like the idea of having notification. I also like the idea of being able to see, like, I'm using my mouse too much for this. But I think that personally, I think that would be a bit too advanced to include in an IDE by default. You'd just be adding too many features that would only be used by a niche of your users. So this pop-up right here is called Commando, and that's sort of a new feature for Komodo 9 in that we did have it before. It was called Fast Open, and it allowed you to quickly open files. And now in Komodo 9 we're adding a lot of functionality to it. So right now you can, I think I have it set to files right now. I can search all of these things already. So everything, bookmarks, commands, files, open files, tools and commands. So I can type in here, and it will search just across all of my files and tools and etc. And allow me to open that. Not unlike you would see in Sublime. It's sort of the same thing, but we try to kind of bring it closer to the experience you would get in Alfred on OS X, if you're familiar, where you can search for items and then perform actions on it. So right now I can only open them, but soon you'll be able to actually find an item and perform an action on it, like rename, move, delete, etc.
Nice.
So just for comparison, this is actually the way it looked like in Komodo 8. So we had Fast Open, which was just to go for files, and now in Komodo 9 we've completely overhauled that, and are still overhauling that and adding a lot of functionality. So that's one of the workflow items that I've been working on to suit my workflow, and also think will facilitate the workflow of many others. Another thing I recently implemented, or recently in the past version, is breadcrumbs in Komodo, which I believe PHPStorm has as well, right?
Yeah, it does.
So the idea by that is that you just have a context to the file that you're working with. So I can be working with, I'm working in the SDK editor right now, and I could want to edit another SDK file right now, and I can just easily click the relevant folder entry and then go to the relevant file. I could even go one up and then recurse into one of those subdirectories. Furthermore, I could want to search in the SDK directory, and I just press Control and then click it, and then it allows me to search right in there. I could want to perform actions on a menu entry, and I believe that's Shift. I press Shift and then it selects it there. It can be something more. Hold on, let me go somewhere completely different, and it will just go there for me. So just as a quick shortcut to get to those file actions. So that's something I recently implemented to facilitate my workflow. Another thing is open files, which is probably the first thing I implemented when I started working on Komodo to facilitate the workflow that I was looking for. And this is kind of for those people that that have like a huge amount of tabs open. I don't know if any of you are like that, but I tend to have like 20 or 30 tabs open. And if I'm doing that through my tab bar, I'll open it right now. So if I'm doing that through my tab bar, it can be a mess to get through. Where there were already macros to sort them so that you have all the file all JavaScript files together or whatnot, but it's still a mess. So what this does is, as you can see, it sorts your files by name and then groups them also. But you could go even further than that, like you can group them by extension. you can group them by folder, the parent folder. You could group them by their entire folder structure. And you can even group them by pattern, which right now wouldn't show you anything because I'm not using a pattern right now. But if I was working in a MVC structure or something, I could have my models, my views, my controllers, etc. I can then choose how to sort them, if it's descending or ascending. I can, and I can basically access all of this information right from the API. I think I have a macro for it here even. There we go. So this is when I was working on Staccato, which is another product that ActiveState works on, and I wanted to structure my open files in a way that is relevant to that project. So I just created my own patterns here, and I launched that whenever I start the project, and then it will sort and group those files accordingly. One last thing I want to quickly show. Shawn spoke about how his UI was very cluttered at first. I think Komodo does a pretty good job at giving you a clean UI, but you can customize it any way you want. So you already saw right here that I could toggle my panes, which is a pretty basic feature. But I could even combine panes, and I'll warn you right now that currently in Komodo 9 this is bugged, so it's not going to work as supposed, but I'll give you the basic idea. I can combine two panes together, so I could drag this here, and if I were to let this go here, it's going to bug out now, but once it's fixed, it would actually combine them so that such that you have your open files and your your project files open, or like right side by side, or vertically side by side. You could even hide your toolbar. You would still be able to access your menu items right here. It shows your most recent add menu items here. I can make my toolbar show again. I have my menu bar there. Basically, you have full flexibility to customize it any way you want, and you do it with JavaScript, CSS, and ZOL, which is basically HTML for desktop applications. Tons more to show, but I won't hijack this entire Hangout for that.
What about automated refactorings and things like that?
Yeah, so you can refactor. It's not something I personally use a whole lot, so you'll excuse me if I'm not completely familiar with that. Let me find a file that it actually works on. JavaScript code intel is currently being completely redone to have better support for all sorts of structures that you might have, so it's not working as supposed right now. So Python should work. So I can rename a class member. It tells me where they occur. I can show changes, so it's going to preview what it's going to do. And apply.
It's pretty clever. I like that dialogue there.
And it's.
What's the company's perspective on things like automated refactoring? How highly do you price such functionality?
Well, this is a new feature in Komodo 8, so it's not something that we were focusing on until then. But yeah, it is something that we're looking to evolve further on. I think the angles that we're taking, as I alluded to earlier on, is that we want to implement the core functionality that you want, and from there you're able to add your own more specific functionality, such as, you know, I kind of demoed with the sorting, like you could add your own patterns. Similarly with refactoring, you could, if you wanted to, simply use the code intel database to get the information you need and implement your very own refactoring methods. That's not to say that we're not going to add more functionality to it. Absolutely not. We are going to be adding more functionality to it. The point is that you have this flexibility to do it yourself, and if we are working on something, like we're in development, we're testing something, you could even just take that chunk of testing that we're doing and apply it to your code.
Can I ask why you don't use automated refactorings, or why that's not something you like to use?
Well, I spend most of my time in JavaScript and a little bit of Python. So, and on top of that, I'm not as strong on patterns as Laravel folk tend to be, or PHP folks in general tend to be very, very pattern driven. Whereas with JavaScript, when I build a library or whatever, I kind of go with what is appropriate for that library, and I don't tend to refactor it afterwards. I tend to have a clear idea of what I'm going to do. I implement that, and then that project is done. And if I need to come back and change something there later on, I work with the structure that I used there. I think if you're going to be spending a whole lot of time refactoring, I mean, it's dependent on your project, but for me, that's just time wasted, time that I could be spending on working on a new feature. So, yeah, refactoring is not really a standard part of my workflow, I would say.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'm going to do a quick one because we're a little bit over time right now. So most of my demonstration is going to be basic and stuff. As soon as it can actually find my terminal. Doesn't seem to be working. That's interesting.
So, by the way, as long as you're searching for that anyway, FYI, when you do a Hangout, you can share your entire screen, and then it will show your context menu. That's why I was messing with that earlier.
Right. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to launch in. This is just a demo application for the tutorial course I just finished up for Tuts Plus. So it's just like a basic to-do app, as you can probably guess by the very simplistic name. Can you just let me know if it artifacts at all? Because the terminal redraws and the stuff aren't great.
Looking good so far.
All right, so pop open Vim. Usually the first thing you do if you get in here, if you don't open it with a file, you want to look for something. So I use Control-P for my file finding. There's also unite.vim, which can do buffer searching, file searching, and a few other neat little things. But I don't know, I'm kind of lazy with setting it up, so I kind of went back to Control-P. So I guess I'll open the to-do controller in here. Type it out here. Vim's not really, it's not an IDE. You can attach different things for refactoring that do a lot of the basic features that PHPStorm advertises. So you can do extract method, extract class, all little things like that. But at the end of the day, Vim is very much a text editor, so it wants to work with text. It wants to work with byte strings. It uses buffers to determine what you're working with. And since Vim has been around for, 40 years? Something like that, on and off in different forms. I should say Vi has been around that long, but Vim not quite as long. So it handles a lot of things super well, but at its core, it is still a terminal application, so there's certain things that don't work so well all the time, and hopefully NeoVim can address some of those. Before I get into the workflow too much, some of the shortcomings of Vim, which kind of led to me using Emacs with Evil, which is effectively turning Emacs into Vim. It doesn't really have good async support right now. They're working on that with NeoVim, and it's in place, but it's not quite mature enough. And as most people know, VimScript is terrible. Nobody likes working with VimScript, so working with Lisp all day is kind of nice, and it's kind of easier to do certain things. I'm a terrible schemer, so using eLisp is kind of challenging for me, but I'm going to get yelled at for saying scheme with eLisp there, but Guile is the GNU scripting language, and they're trying to port that into Emacs right now, and that's going pretty well. So if that happens, things like JavaScript and other languages could be supported in Emacs, which is kind of exciting. But since I'm not technically representing Emacs today, let's jump into some Vim stuff. So most of the motions you see right now are using basic commands like W will move me forward a word, B will move me back a word. If I press 10J, it'll jump me down 10 lines, 10K will go back up. Everything in Vim is composable, so you can start linking together your different commands to get different tasks accomplished. Many IDEs and editors allow Vim mode for this reason, because keyboard motion is extremely easy. That's what Vim excels at. It's really good at text manipulation. Komodo's is actually extremely good. There's a couple of missing features, like so in Vim you can do delete word, and that'll remove a whole word, and that's DW. If you're in the middle of the word and you do DW, it only completes to the end of that word. A lot of editors leave this out, but you can do DIW, and that'll remove the inner word from where you are. There's also something called DAW, which you can't see it here, but it would do a slightly different action with white space. So that's something neat with text manipulation. Vim also has CTAG support built in, as I think Adam addressed earlier. But if I come over, put my cursor on to-do creation, I'm maybe wondering, okay, how does this work? Where is this defined? If I press Control right bracket, it'll jump me over to that declaration, and then I can come in here and see how the class works. And then I can pop back up the stack with Control T, or if I just want to jump to the last buffer, it's something like Control Shift 6, but and that's just for the up caret, I'm pretty sure. But I map it to my leader key and then P. And the Vim leader key is kind of a nice shortcut mechanism where you have full control over anything you bind to the leader key. So most of my shortcuts are bound to there. So I can do different things like run my tests, which will split off into a different buffer. Or I'm sorry, it'll split off into a shell. Or I can load up my Control P with just pressing space F for find a file. So neat little things like that in there. And right now I have my CTAGs mapping the entire Laravel directory, so I'm pretty sure if I run it on this, yep, takes me straight into Illuminate's response information, and now I have this information available to me through autocomplete as well, which is pretty nice. So again, I can just jump around different files. I do have a tree viewer. I don't use it too much these days, but it's just nerd tree. I have snippet support, but I don't use it, and I don't know. That's about all I can really think to show you. I mean, can you guys think of any questions for me while I'm using this stuff?
Well, you go ahead, Shawn.
Well, my question is why Vim? Why even? I mean, what's the value there? Like, it seems like I could do any of that stuff in my tool, and then stuff that VI stuff that VI couldn't do. So why do you use Vim?
All right, Shawn, I couldn't hear you. Could you try to do that again?
Yeah. All I'm saying is I see the functionality, and I'm not seeing anything that like I couldn't do.
Hold on 1 second.
Saying this the third time is going to make me really sound like a jerk.
Okay, can you try one more time?
Yeah, test.
Oh, now it works.
Okay.
Thank you, Google.
So my question is, I don't see anything that I couldn't do in like a PHPStorm or something, but I do.
This is ridiculous. I'm not even kidding.
I'm not asking this
really
question.
ridiculous. I'm not sure which.
Here, I'll type it to you.
There you go. Okay, so why Vim?
Yeah. So if
mostly it started from what I explained earlier, which yeah, my screen's done sharing now. Just had to make sure. Can you see me again, Shawn? Okay. So I started with Vim once TextMate started falling out, and then once you learn Vim, it's really hard to stop using the key bindings, and there's just something about the speed of Vim that attracts me. I get extremely moody if my editor does not keep up with my actions. So if I can't, let's say, open a file buffer immediately, or I have to wait for the GUI to sit there and render something, and like let's say the UI thread hangs for whatever reason, it annoys the crap out of me. Which is part of the reason I went to Emacs, because if I perform an action in Vim and it has to shell out, it'll sit there and hang that entire thread because Vim is not multi-threaded. So I like Vim for its simplicity. I like that it's lightweight. I like that I can make it register any different syntax, because I mean I have to jump through projects a lot and I like to keep one editor. So if I have to go between CoffeeScript Node, regular JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, like any of those, and then like the 20 different syntax templating language that Ruby supports, I can actually get all those registered right away. And if I can't find one, I can use Vundle, which is Vim's current like newest package manager. I can just pull it in real quick, and then all my syntax highlights again. So I like that simplicity. I like being able to fetch out the packages that I need quickly, and pretty much it's never given me a lot of issues. Now, one thing I wish it did better was give me higher order constructs to work with different data structures. I want to tell it more plainly what I want to do. I don't want to sit there and write a finite state machine or a regex parser to get through different text objects. Vim has the low-level objects like paragraphs, words, lines, things like that, but that's not going to help me with the syntax.
Oh, can you hear me, by the way? You can't hear me?
Okay. Now I can hear you again.
So you don't feel like you're losing something from the actual IDE doing it? Like you just said, you want those higher order structures, but you are giving up. I know that Vim has some kind of text modification, regex type FSM oriented refactorings, but do you feel like you really are missing something by not being able to have a lot higher level control? Do you feel like you get some speed back for some reason through your usage of the Vim specific oriented interface, or was because I think that I've pursued Vim a few times, and one of the pushbacks I have is because I use Dvorak instead of QWERTY, and so while it's definitely possible to use, and it's not that much different because you were talking about using DIW and everything, I'm like, dude, that's no different between using VI or anything else, or I can use that on the keyboard in Dvorak or QWERTY, but there's probably like 25 different automated actions that I use in the IDEA tools that I don't think that Komodo or VI, and I know Sublime Text doesn't support any of them. So I don't know that, like, how do you deal with the fact that all those tools are like just gone?
Largely, I would say not using them a whole lot throughout my entire career kind of prevented me from leaning on them too much. Like I started off with C++ in school, minus things I did in high school and whatnot. But for a lot of C++ things, we were taught to like rely on the terminal. So a lot of the things that I've always done are terminal-based or Vim-based. And then I've tried out things like Xcode and whatnot when I was dabbling with OS X development. So I started getting into some of the neater things I can do inside of the editor. Largely with like Xcode has really good LLVM integration built in. So the actual compiler would squawk at me while I'm sitting there editing text, and that was kind of neat. Overall, I like with the languages I use, like Ruby. RubyMine is actually excellent for changing around Ruby things and walking through the source tree and everything, but the static analysis does not work well in Ruby. There's not a whole lot you can do, and things can be anywhere. So right now, things like C tags are actually probably the better way of working with them. We all know JavaScript's kind of a mess with that sort of stuff, but I don't know. I've just a lot of the refactoring stuff I've just done by hand so much. I don't think too much about it. But like I said earlier, I really do want a better way of working with it. But it's really hard to let go of something like Vim and Emacs where I can literally change everything. And Emacs is its own operating system pretty much, so I can modify anything I need. But at the same time, then I have to modify it or wait for someone else to do it. So there's trade-offs, but right now the way those things work are better for me at the moment. But I totally see the allure of things like PHPStorm and Komodo because they offer really awesome tools.
I see a lot of pushback when it comes to instant response. Like it seems like, and I get this because I use Sublime Text because I wanted to leave back behind Zen Studio because it was like sluggish, and my computer's faster now, and I'm on a solid state drive and all that junk. And so I can use more powerful tools without having to suffer, Mm-hmm. But I really think that a lot of people don't use the more powerful tools specifically. I think this might just be me talking, because you don't get that instant ballistic feedback. So if I do something, I hit a couple keys, I know exactly what happened, and I'm not verifying with my eyes and overhead like that. And I think that what happens when you use like a slightly slower tool like PHPStorm, which I mean is still pretty snappy, especially if you have a really powerful computer, and I'm running Linux, and so I don't have as many resource needs, and solid state drive and all that jazz. I get used to the fact that it's going to take a second sometimes, not like even a second, like a quarter of a second, but that's the difference. A quarter second makes a big difference when you're talking about like behavioral operant conditioning. But at the same time, like when I hit a couple keys and like this large scale amount of stuff starts happening, I sit back more. So I think, okay, I'm looking at this class. What do I want to happen? I hit a couple keys and it does it. So I'm not really getting as much of that type feedback, key feedback, because there's not as much manually to do. So since there's less to do, then I get a little bit less of that slowdown, that sluggish feeling. But that did not happen to me for the first, 6 weeks of learning the tool. It wasn't just like free. I didn't get that sense of how to manipulate those structures until I really invested a lot of effort into it.
Right. Yeah, and like a lot of the irony behind what I'm saying is I actually spend way more times watching Rails boot or try to run my tests than I do sitting there, executing the keystroke and waiting for the buffer to refresh. So, with PHP, I was able to like kind of do things a lot quicker, and with certain Ruby tests, obviously not the ones that boot the entirety of Rails, but I can sit there and run them super quickly, and that's when I really value the quick feedback, because I don't like waiting for tests, and my ADD literally will drive me insane if something takes too long, because I'll look out the window here like I have construction going on the road, so I'm sure you can see me keep looking off to the right. So like I totally have that response where I need it to happen or I know I'm going to drift off. But because I wait for Ruby or for Rails to boot and my test week to run, sometimes I can like go down and get coffee. That's like a long enough wait period. But if it's more than like a second for a response, or if the main UI thread hangs, that's what drives me nuts, because sometimes they aren't buffering keyboard input properly, so I'm going to lose half of those keystrokes. So as long as the editor supports that, fine, I'm pretty good.
I guess it's subjective in the end. I mean, since obviously Shawn doesn't seem to mind too much, but yeah, personally, I'm with you as well. Like I showed you Commando earlier, and you could probably see that the results were taking a while to render, or not to render, just to show up in general. And I'm not even talking much, like probably like 100 milliseconds, which to many might not even be noticeable, but you have no idea how much time I've already spent on that, just trying to get that to render immediately. And I'm still going to be spending more time on that because it annoys me when it's not instant, And it's the same thing with keystrokes. But I guess, I mean, I've always thought that this is a general consensus, like everyone wants their editor to be fast, but evidently, hearing from Shawn, it must not be as objective as I thought it was.
I think it's that whole thing where there's like a huge gray area of tolerance,
I really think that, if you're using PHPStorm or something, it might at first seem sluggish, but you learn a new paradigm, like a new way of viewing, a new way of thinking about it that you don't predict. You can't predict before you get into it. And for example, there's just certain things that are not even an option for me. So if I go and load up some other project that was made in Sublime Text, I can almost guarantee you that I'm going to see so many namespace imports that are not even used. They're just gray squiggled to me because it's like, hey, look, unused namespace import. And so when I see people actually manually type their namespace imports, I'm thinking, what are you doing? This is like your whole life gone. If you're a PHP developer and you're coding like kind of modern PHP, then you're doing these namespace imports manually. You're losing like weeks of your life. You could be going home and taking naps or something. And
you must be writing a lot of namespace imports for that to be true.
See, I can pump out code like that you wouldn't even believe. Like someday we'll fire it up here and I'll like code up for like 30 minutes, but you'd be surprised what you can get done when you view the code a little bit differently. And regarding like the refactoring support, for me it's not even much of an option anymore because I introduced so many fewer bugs into the code, and I actually do refactoring. So without the refactoring support, maybe I think, okay, well, jeez, changing the name of that method that's really poorly named for some reason, because I named it really poorly apparently, is just going to be a pain because it's used in a number of other places, and I don't want to break everything, so I'm not going to do it. But if I can just hit a couple keys and within 10 seconds have it propagated throughout the entire code base, and I can feel very, very confident that it was done without breaking anything, then I'm refactoring all the time, and I am refactoring all the time. I tend to write a lot of my code into a single method. And then I just start highlighting pieces and abstract them out into other methods. Just hit a button, hit 2, say name, hit enter, and it's in a different method. I just keep doing that over and over again until the whole class is done, and then it's just cleaned up, and I remove my little braces, and then I'm done. So I really think that if you don't have those tools, your code is different. The tools actually kind of define what your product is in the end. That's my thought on that. I think that if you have like to do all this stuff really manually, then you're going to end up with results that are different than if you could have just said, okay, really, I'm just passing by, but I happen to know that's an awfully named class. Make a tweak, and it's done. It's changed forever, and it's improved forever. And it's just one way where you can take that 3-hour budget you have for implementing some small feature and actually make the code base more sound while you're doing it without having to run your budget over.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings up a good point where I'm trying to work on a new series here where we can kind of like inspect each other's workflows. So either with that or a second call, because we're probably way over time here, I would really like to try to create a problem and then work through it. So that way we can like kind of analyze the way the different IDEs can help us solve these problems. Because ultimately, the editor should be helping us think as programmers, because we don't actually get paid to type, we get paid to solve problems. So it's something I want to analyze, I want to look at. But I'm pretty sure we're out of time for today, so I really want to thank you guys for joining the discussion and representing your favorite tool and IDE. And hopefully we can have a talk here at some point and kind of follow up and maybe look a little bit more in depth at some topics we didn't get to cover today.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's always nice to share and to get new perspectives.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally agree on the perspective. It's especially for me, considering I'm pretty much exclusively Komodo as of the past 2 years. It's interesting to talk about other editors and see what the other editors are doing out there.
And it's really fun to talk to somebody who works on an IDE all day. So that's good stuff.
It's really fun to work on an IDE all day. So.
Oh, I believe it.
I love it.
All right, guys. Well, take care, and thanks again.
See ya.
All right. See ya.